Inuit is at 72 degrees. Hello.
Trevor, you are a technological wizard. Is this better? Yeah? Yeah?
I think it's a little too
No, they don't need to.
It's too loud, man.
Justin, you should be used to this. Are we good? Okay. So Pond Inlet is at 72 degrees north, which means we get 3 months of 24-hour sun going around, and we get 3 months of 24-hour darkness. The sun disappears for the last day around the second week of November and comes back at the end of January. And it's amazing and it's awesome. And at the coldest time of the year is when humanity is the warmest. So I would like to invite you to think of a different way of understanding the Arctic through the eyes of the people that actually live there. Can I change this? Next slide. For a bit of context, when you think about the Arctic, most people, I think, visualize this barren, cold wasteland of blowing snow and, I don't know, there's a polar bear walking by or something. But it is a place of amazing humanity. I was saying yesterday to Agatha that one of the things that bothers me the most is in English, there's an expression that the Arctic is the canary in the coal mine. Raise your hands if you've heard this. Okay, what happens to the canary? It dies. So when I was working with Inuit Youth and explaining this concept that in the past, coal miners used to take a canary into the mine, and the canary would die if there was dangerous gases in the mine. And the youth got really quiet. Now put yourself in the position of being told that you are the canary, that it's okay, the rest of the world just needs you to suffer to have a wake-up call. So please stop saying canary in the coal mine. It is an absolutely horrendous thing to be a young person living in the Arctic, being told that the rest of the world sees you as their indicator for action. So that's just my personal pet peeve, but I think it also really displays the disconnect between scientists and communities, between the people that live in the Arctic and are the firsthand witnesses to what's going on, and the rest of the world. So this is just, I think it sets the tone to talk about how do you do something different. And I'm specifically talking to you early career people, because you have the opportunity to not be that voice. And so we're going to invite you to think a little bit differently about how do you learn about the Arctic in order to make people care. Explain your stuff.
Well, as you'll find out when you come up, I have sort of done the reverse. I, in the past, have, last 20 years have been working as an educator in the South, and I've just fairly recently started working with Smart Ice and working with them to develop with the communities a new operator training program. So to do training in the communities with youth and harvesters to operate our equipment out on the ice. And so for me, it's been an incredible learning experience to be working with those communities, and based on Smart Ice's experience and certainly Shelly's input and Justin's and many, many others. Our first step was to speak to people about how should we be doing training, or how can we do training together, really? And so it's been more an education for me So it's been quite an amazing experience, and I'm looking forward to sharing that a little bit with you when we go upstairs.
Sounds good. So I think right now we're going to split into the two groups. One group will stay here and then you'll switch off. So let's do that quickly. Yes, Trevor Bell.
Explain the top photo on the left. It might not be obvious to people what they're looking at.
Oh, what do you think you're looking at? Okay, all I heard was blur, 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 blur. So it's a hunter hunting narwhal.
And then you can see the narwhal in the water.
There may be people who question why fur and why eating whales, because aren't whales just lovely? Yeah, they're great. They're great with soy sauce. We'll talk a little bit about that throughout both this morning and this afternoon, especially this afternoon, Alona and I will be talking about Arctic fashion, but not fashion in the way that you're thinking about it just as something frivolous, but something that's actually the expression of the first technology that allowed people to live in the Arctic. Okay, so should we?
Sure, and do we synchronize our watches?
Oh, I don't know.
So it's about half an hour each place.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this side is we're traveling.
Yes, this side you guys are going to come up with myself and Trevor.
Can you switch it over now to, so that, can you switch it to Justin so he can introduce himself? Oh, hey, Justin. You're on a giant screen.
Oh, that's nice. How's Iceland?
Yeah. Not as icy as Nunavut.
Oh, that's true.
Oh. Yeah, I don't know, Justin, I feel like I'm the only person that's kind of like too warm here. It's kind of funny. Everyone's kept saying, oh, it's going to be cold. I'm like, nope, no, it's not. Okay, great. Okay. So what I'd like to do, if you're okay with this, Justin, so we're going to be kind of switching. Can you do a split screen between the presentation and Justin so he can be on the screen?
He's on the screen. If I just share my screen, it's going to be on the.
Okay. Justin, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I do. I can't see any of you right now, but good morning, good afternoon. My name is Justin Milton. I am originally from Mitimatalik or Pondilit, Nunavut, but I'm currently living in the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people, aka Ottawa, the capital of Canada. And I'm here with Shelly, virtually, of course, in my home in Ottawa, and I am the Iqaluit manager. I could finally see you guys. Hi. And yeah, I'm the Iqaluit manager, and basically I work with Shelly and another person named Eric Solomon, who's from Vancouver, and we work to make Iqaluit awesome, pretty much. And a little bit more context to me, I'm 23 years old. I have a background in Inuit history and Inuit history and learning about, everything, the culture of the North and so forth. So that's me in a nutshell, and I'll pass it back to Shelly.
Great. So if you could change the slide, please. Justin, can you see the presentation as well?
I see the slide that, yes. Okay. I see the picture with you and me.
Yeah. I like this picture because we sort of look like secret agents, which kind of is I guess, our approach to working with research. Fundamentally, Iqaluit is a bridge between research and communities. In Inuktitut, that's what Iqaluit means, is a bridge. What I've been seeing and what the youth and the communities see is that research and communities are talking past each other like this. And it's horrible. It's a bunch of well-intentioned people who don't quite know how to bridge the gap. And so Iqaluit sets up youth to be that bridge between research and communities, because youth have an amazing ability to both understand Indigenous knowledge and to understand science and technology. They're amazing. Like I can't even look at you, Justin. Yes, I can. I'm looking at you. But we do it with a lot of humor because we also understand that this is a space that is fraught with a very bad history, with a lot of political tension, and honestly, just a lot of human reality of not knowing how to approach each other as human beings. And so Ikarvik is extremely successful in bringing communities and research together for the betterment of Arctic science. Because if there's one thing that we know is that governments make decisions based on the best available knowledge. Typically, to governments, that has meant based on the best available science. Great, but that's only part of the story. And we would like to talk to you about the other half of the story. Okay, next slide. So let's talk about science. Let's talk about scientists. From my observations as an anthropologist, I've noticed that scientists very much enjoy wearing red. Sometimes scientists are in groups, sometimes they're by themselves, making very dramatic,
Shelly,
conquering gestures.
Shelly, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I'm going to have to interrupt you.
Oh,
This is not
What?
how I see Arctic scientists at all. This is a textbook example of Western science dominating the market of what is seen in the Arctic. So if you could go
what,
to-
Justin?
Yeah, I'm gonna disagree with you. This is not Arctic science to me. I'm gonna put my foot down.
But
I'm
look
gonna
at all
say-
these shiny white houses. Like, look at them all. They're all
I
same.
appreciate that they're all matching and that they have life vests. I mean, those are all important, but that's not Arctic scientists to me. I'm gonna paraphrase. I'm not gonna actually paraphrase. I'm gonna I'm gonna say a quote that I said in 2016, 2015 at another Arctic Net conference, and I'm gonna repeat it here again. Inuit are the original Arctic scientists. I want people to comprehend that, and I want people to really think about that. The original people who lived in the Arctic know the Arctic.
Think about it while he's
because they
pausing. Next
lived
slide.
Yeah, that's an awesome example of an Arctic scientist mixing in modern electronics and technology with the traditional knowledge and values of the North. And so you see here a man with a phone, and he's probably using a GPS or a spot to navigate through the Arctic. And then on the other one, there's an example of navigation with a map. So Inuit have been doing this for a long, long time. And I know it's weird when you compare things like Western institutional science and something as unfamiliar, let's say, as traditional Indigenous knowledge. In this case, it's Inuit or IQ for short. But the point is, we have a lot of testing systems ourselves. We observe, we hypothesize, we test, we even peer review. And yes, there's no writing in a lot of Indigenous cultures. And yes, there are some, the tests are not as rigorous, I would say, as Western science, but that does not invalidate Indigenous knowledge and values at all. So I'm gonna stop right there and then let Shelly continue. Thank you.
Okay, wait. It's peer reviewed? You mean like if somebody is thinking about sea ice and has been observing it for generations and
Yeah.
testing
And
this?
let's go with that
follow
example.
through?
So let's imagine that a family is going to the sea ice. In the winter, the sea freezes over, creating a large platform for people to use. And so when we say we peer review, we observe, we do exactly that. A hunter might test the sea ice to see how thick it is, and a hunter might use his knowledge from his father or his grandparents that this part of the land and sea is unstable, for example. And so he will report that back to his community or his family. And that to me is just as valid as someone writing down in paper saying this is the results that we got from this geographical study, for example. And the only difference to me is that these two ways of knowing are using different resources and using different languages. And that to me is a really cool way to express how Inuit and all Indigenous peoples, for that matter, have observations and testing and all the same stuff that Western science uses to measure.
So a peer review system where you could actually die if your knowledge isn't correct.
Yeah,
I think I'd like to see that in the world of
that's one way to
academia.
put it. I mean, there are consequences, obviously, if you don't know what you're doing, but in a way, yes, we do have those rigorous testings. And in the case of the Arctic, since it is an extreme climate, then you may have to be think ahead a few steps, let's say.
So I guess if we think about it in a different way, people who've considered Indigenous knowledge to be like old-timey stories are missing the point.
Yeah, and that's something that's still perpetuated to this day, is people think, excuse me, people think that Indigenous knowledge is old-timey, it's outdated, it's irrelevant in this modern world, but that couldn't be further from the truth. And I can't really see the audience right now, but I have a feeling a lot of you have already visited the North. I mean, you're in Iceland, but the reality is a lot of these misconceptions about Indigenous knowledge and values is still very much present today. And this is exactly why I'm here virtually. And this is why Shelly's there in person, is to talk to you about these things. And I'll let Shelly continue.
Next slide, please. My other pet peeve is people thinking that Indigenous knowledge is over here and science is over here, rather than looking for ways for the two ways of understanding to work together. A young woman that I work with who's an amazing seamstress has been able to process this so much faster than scientists who debate and come up with pedagogies and all these things. She said, oh, people are taking Indigenous knowledge and science and trying to ram them together, trying to disprove or prove. She said, it's a zipper. You're taking two things, two ways of knowing, and just like a zipper, you're combining them in a way that makes something greater than the two separate parts. And I love working with youth because they take these things that people have struggled with for years and go, well, that's stupid. I mean, this is a zipper. Let's zip it up. The problem is there's a system that needs to shift. And part of that system has turned Indigenous people into these like almost mythological creatures on the land that I don't know, it's taken away the sense of Indigenous people as full partners in research, not skidoo drivers, not bear monitors, not Sherpas to pack your stuff around, which is what we often see, but full partners from the beginning of the process, from determining your research questions, which we'll talk about a bit later with Indigenous priorities in the North, all the way through to determining your methodologies and doing the analysis. Because when Indigenous people are involved in analysis, they can help the rest of the world understand why this stuff matters. In this picture, first of all, you may not have realized yesterday you were spoken to by an Indigenous scientist. Does anyone know who that was? Inuit Youth is an Inuk scientist. And this again is this missing thing in the world of science where we are scientists and you are Indigenous people. Completely negates the fact that there are stunningly brilliant Indigenous scientists who are bridging that gap. So when Inuit spoke to you about mercury in whales, she's speaking to you with the deep knowledge of someone who actually is going to care about that whale in a deeper sense, but is also going to celebrate eating it. This is a connection that not many scientists have to the work that they're studying. This is a group of youth that I work with in Pond Inlet, and we're looking for evidence of microplastics. Both at this point, we were only looking in the ocean itself, but in conjunction with Smart Ice, who you'll meet later, we're also going to be looking at microplastics in the sea ice. So again, this is something that people aren't used to seeing. They're not used to seeing Indigenous scientists. They're used to seeing, you know, a beautiful picture of a scientist with their arm around an elder, like, check it out, I worked with Indigenous people. We want to shift this so that Indigenous people are the partners that scientists can work with, laugh with, live with, and learn from. And really, we see it as two-way capacity building. In the Arctic where I live, our education system is crap. Like, it is probably the worst in North America. Researchers coming in bring new knowledge. They bring information of things like ocean acidification into communities where you can then bring the best that you have as a scientist and be met with Indigenous youth who bring the best that they have. This is the ideal for Arctic research. Sorry, my screen just shut down over here. So Justin, what in your mind, Indigenous youth working with scientists, what, you know, ultimately, what does this mean for a world that's trying to understand a changing Arctic?
Mm-hmm. Well, to me, it means we're Indigenous people and Inuit and Iqaluit in particular, we're inviting you guys to work with us to use both ways of knowing instead of exclusively using one way of knowing. We want you to use the best of both worlds. And that's exactly what Iqaluit strived to do all the way back in 2015. And there is an active group of youth and mentors in multiple Nunavut communities, as well as some presence in the Yukon as well. And basically, this is just an invitation to help understand how to work together. It's not all about what we work on. It's also how we work together, how we develop the relationships with one another, because at the end of the day, it is two different ways of knowing. And so in order for us to communicate effectively on both sides, we have to be willing to, you know, be open to one another and be willing to learn from one another. And so that's sort of the thing that Iqaluit loves to do, is to help connect two groups of people together. In this case, it would be Inuit youth and mentors and scientists. And then at the end of the day, both parties, both groups benefit. The researchers will get more qualitative and quantitative data. And then the Indigenous people will have more input and have much more active and authentic engagement with the researchers.
Okay, wait, whoa, slow down. You're telling me I need to build a relationship? Can't you just tell me like your Indigenous knowledge so I can like publish it?
Yeah, okay. I could put it to you in another way, Shelly, if that's okay. And in order for all of us to actually visualize what that looks like, I actually have a video that I would like to share, if that's okay.
Yep. Yeah, we can share it from here. It's on the next slide.
Okay. All right.
While we're bringing it up, okay, there we go. Let's just see if we have volume.
Just share sound.
There is something here, share sound.
Yeah, you have to reshare. Or you can share sound. Before you
Go back.
share.
Justin, while we're figuring this out, do you want to just explain what SciQ is and how it originated?
Okay, let me briefly describe what SciQ is. So in 2018, Iqaluit had a summit in Cambridge Bay, and basically all of the cohorts of Iqaluit came together, and we brainstormed on how exactly this can become a reality, combining both Western science and Indigenous knowledge. And so SciQ is, in short words, a combination of science and Inuit Kauyimayetokangi, and an invitation on how to best work with communities in the North when you are a researcher.
Because what we also know, and we see time and time again, is scientists are told, go work with Indigenous communities, but no one's telling you how. I mean, this is just the thing that I'm not Indigenous. I get it. I get that you're coming from a system that is telling you to come in with your questions and your methods already predetermined in order to get the funding. No one's telling you to stop and listen and rethink how to create the best possible research. So the youth, again, in their awesome brilliance, just said, well, this is stupid. So we're going to tell people what you need to do before, during, and after your research, because Inuit knowledge and Inuit values are not about circling things on a map. It's about the way you work with each other to get the answers. And all the researchers that we work with who follow this end up laughing so hard their faces hurt, crying over, sad things, being embraced by the community, and ultimately getting better data. And so this is a video that the youth have put together to explain to you what they mean when they're inviting you into their communities.
Hi, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about Iqaluit, so please come in. Inuit isn't probably what you think it is. From what we've seen, a lot of researchers tend to think it's just data, something you can collect and analyze. We know that researchers are always told to incorporate IQ into your research and meaningfully engage communities. But you might not have been told how to do these things. Don't worry, Iqaluit's here to help you.
What's a Karvik?
We're a group of youth from different Nunavut and Yukon communities who are all interested in improving relationships between researchers and northern communities and seeing more meaningful incorporation of IQ into research.
Okay, cool. So you guys can be field assistants and bear monitors for us researchers.
No. Bear monitors and field assistants aren't really what Inuit communities see as meaningful engagement. In fact, many Arctic communities don't feel like they've been meaningfully engaged, consulted, or informed by researchers. We know that meaningful engagement and incorporating Inuit into research has been left up to you guys to figure out on your own. So we're going to help with that.
Okay, so what is Inuit Kayumajatukangi?
Inuit Kayumajatukangi.
Kajumajayukanjit.
Inuit Kaina Matukwangwi.
Kaujimajatukangi. Okay.
Finally, someone who is asking what we mean when we say IQ. Inuit Kayumajatukangi is a way of knowing. IQ is more than just traditional knowledge because it incorporates knowledge, customs, and values. It is our way of life. It is as much about how we interact with each other, our behaviors, and our attitudes, as well as what we know.
We chose to use Inuit Kayumajatukangi as a guide to help us interpret what meaningful engagement of Inuit communities and research can look like. We believe that understanding IQ from our perspective is what will lead to better work in our communities.
When you really understand Inuit Kayumajatukangi, meaningful engagement of communities just happens naturally.
We created SciQ to help you understand that incorporating IQ is equally about how a researcher works with the community, not just the data they collect. We believe that by following our recommendations, researchers can incorporate IQ in a way that meets the needs of both communities and scientists.
So, how do I do this? In reality, how am I supposed to apply this to my research?
Don't worry, we're here to help you. Inuit Youth have created SciQ, which is our way of explaining how science and Inuit Kayumajatukangi can work together.
SciQ contains 41 recommendations for what you can do before, during, and after your research.
Oh, great. So it's a checklist. And if I do this...
Whoa, slow down. It's not a checklist. It's more about how you should work with the community. Maybe think of it this way. Don't think of it as a checklist of IQ actions, but having great IQ attitudes. This is what will result in better work with our communities.
It's not your fault because you probably didn't know this. When a scientist or researcher says that IQ is not valuable, you're saying that we Inuit are not valuable either. That our customs, our beliefs, and our way of life is not valuable. So because this is just a really big misunderstanding, we wanted to invite you in to work with our communities and provide you some recommendations for what we think it would look like to incorporate IQ into your research. And it might result in better research for you.
So you're telling me that we can create better research?
And it would lead for more meaningful engagement in our communities. All right, now let's look at some examples of our recommendations.
Actually, you can
Be a human
stop it there.
first and a researcher second. So what that means is introduce yourself as your name first and not as the...
So the rest of the video you can find on our website, eddiecarvick.org, and it will then go into some of the recommendations. This was created by Inuit Youth, but I think the messages are pretty applicable around the Arctic, which is nobody's training you in a university to come in and be humble and listen. Nobody's telling you that there is other ways of knowing sometimes, unless you specifically go into the social sciences. But if you're studying lichen or rocks or caribou, nobody's telling you that there are other ways to learn. And so this is one of our passions, is making sure that as researchers, everybody has access to the best available knowledge. So Justin, basically, Inuit are inviting us to understand the Arctic in a better way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's exactly what's happening too. And this isn't for us to say, hey, you need to listen to Inuit, do this. It's again just a mere invitation to help all of us work together in the North when it comes to both Arctic research and interacting with Arctic community members. And yeah, and this is really cool to me because when you see people like these folks, these Inuit Youth and Inuit mentors, they are teaching you about a place where they actually live in firsthand, and they have millennia of knowledge from our ancestors. And so I think this is a really cool way to share knowledge with one another.
Okay, so we're used to talking to researchers. We're used to having an audience filled with researchers, and here there are researchers, but there's also educators. In your mind, what are the things that an educator needs to take away from this?
Okay. If there's one take-home message from me, it would be this. We know that there's two ways of knowing in this conversation. There's Western institutional science and Indigenous knowledge. And these two ways of understandings are coexisting with each other. Keyword, coexisting with each other. And we want them to be actively connecting with each other. And if we don't actively take part in bringing these two ways of knowing into harmony, then there will inevitably always be gaps in our education system. So for the educators who are listening, myself included, I challenge you guys to try and make sense of these two ways of knowing and then merge them into a way that makes sense and that respects both Indigenous knowledge and Western science. Thank you.
Great. There any questions? I think you stunned them, Justin. Oh no, wait, there's a question.
Because I'm not an Arctic person.
I think, Justin, can you hear, or do we need the microphone?
I think we need the microphone.
Yeah, we need the microphone. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not an Arctic person. I teach water harvesting in the desert. And we, I think, suffer from the same problems in our community where we deal with this problem of, yeah, there's all this water harvesting issues and stuff, and it's really great to, you know, do this and stuff, but in some communities, generally lower income communities, we just cannot, or we just have a lack of participation, I guess is the best way of saying it. And so when I see something like this, I go, wow, this would be great. So how did this start? Was it just the youth of the community saying, hey, I see you guys coming in and you're just not clicking with us? Or
I'll let Shelly answer the question.
Pure frustration was the origin. So I'm trained as an anthropologist. I moved, I grew up in the north and then moved back to Pond Inlet in the year 2000 as Nunavut was created into its own territory. And with that came things like resource development. So suddenly, boom, there's all this interest. Climate change, boom, all this interest. You know, all these people coming to the Arctic. And all of them would walk past Inuit to talk to me because I have a white face, because they knew I could speak their language. I knew where they were coming from. And so I kept turning around, like people would ask me things and I'd be like, but you should be asking over here. And I guess that frustration of saying, this is absolutely ridiculous. So, you know, at that point, I think I'd been living there 2 years. And so people were, oh my God, you've been there 2 years, you know everything. I'm like, I know nothing, but I know people who know really great things. And so the frustration was equally felt by the community who were engaged in research as bear monitors and skidoo drivers and camp cooks. For the bear monitors, there's nothing like holding a gun while someone else is studying things that you know everything about. I mean, what a horrible system. So in the Inuit way, every person in a community should bring the best that they have. And so everybody sort of looked at me and went, you're good at talking. Okay, cool. So you know this system, you know where these people are coming from, you need to work with the youth. And so I was like, what? Work with youth? That sounds terrifying. I'm not trained in this, but maybe that was a good thing because I came in just as a human. And so some of the early things that Ikarvik started to work on were, how do you reduce everything down to the level of humans who care about the Arctic? Now, I would say from my experience, seeing projects that aren't connecting with communities probably means one of two things. Either you could be doing something that people fundamentally really don't care about. So in the north, there's lemming researchers and everyone makes fun of them. They're like, you know, we have bigger problems. Like, and so the lemming researchers constantly try to find people to work with them. And the community says, I'm trying to feed my family and I've got bigger issues than lemmings. So it can be that, but I'd say more often than not, it's your intentions bypassing how the community understands these things. And youth are the ones, let's say you were to come to the north, you would work with the youth for 2 days before you ever talk to the community. And the youth will say, all right, what are you doing? Like, what's your intention? Okay, no one's going to understand it if you say it that way. How are you going to do this? No, you're going to be looking in the wrong place and you need to do it at a different time of year. Who are you working with? Ooh, no, that's not a great person. You need to be speaking with these people. So in effect, the youth train the researcher for 2 to 3 days before they ever set foot into the community as a whole. At that point, you now have a team of allies who go and make sure that the community understands who you are, what you're doing, and what your intentions are. And that, I don't know, Justin, does that kind of explain a little bit about?
Mm-hmm. And then I'll add on a little bit to that as well. So yeah, this Iqaluit was created in part due to frustration of the miscommunication between researchers and the communities. And also, if you've ever been in the university/government research system, you know very well that you have to prepare your questions, your methodology, your your work plan way in advance before you even step into the community. And so that in itself is one of the many, I don't want to say barriers, but barrier is the only word that's coming up to mind. It's one of those things where it limits and hinders the potential for working with communities that much more. And so obviously this is not something that can be fixed overnight, but this is a conversation that a lot more people, I think, should be having.
We try to do this in kind of a fun way. You probably noticed, we're not telling you, you suck. Because there's a whole lot of that. There's a whole lot of that. I think one of our next goals is to create a video series of young Inuit going down and studying white people. Just walking into your home and like opening up your fridge and, checking out what you're eating, because that's what it feels like. When someone comes in and says, I've read a lot of books. I know this place. I'm going to be here for 10 days and I'm going to tell you about your world. And people kind of go, Inuit are very non-confrontational. So most of the time, nothing overtly is said, but there's a lot of laughter after researchers leave because, get a master's student come in who spends like 10 minutes talking. And I think to myself, I wonder if I should tell him this group doesn't speak English. Nah, I'm just going to watch, see what happens. Because he didn't even educate himself to know that the people that he was coming to work with spoke Inuktitut. And so again, it would be very easy to get very frustrated, but we think that it's actually something that we can have a lot of fun with, and that maybe by laughing, you can open your mind in a different way than being shamed for what you don't know. And it seems to work really well. We're awfully busy. Justin, you want to give, we're also talking, sorry, I'm going to be up here a lot today, but we will also be talking about some of the priorities that Inuit Youth have created for community. We don't say community-based research, we say community-driven, because there's a difference between someone coming in and being in a community for 2 weeks and the community driving the research. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well.
Thank you.
Is there any more questions or comments? What time is it there, Justin? It's like 7 in the morning or something?
Yeah, it's like 7:17 a.m. No big deal. I've been in much earlier meetings before.
No, seriously, Arctic Science Summit was a bad one. Okay, so I think what we'll do now is just take a bit of a break and then switch off to the other group. I'm not sure even how long that was.
We're at 11:17. If we have any more time?
We're going to be switching the groups.
We should switch. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
So Justin, want to just hang out here and then the groups are going to switch and we can do this all over again.
So you're gonna repeat the same thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, and by the way, the young woman with the tattoo on her forehead is Inuya's sister.
Oh, okay.
So,
Like her.
yeah,
This one?
that smile.
Yeah.
So I could go and get some more tea.
Yes.
A lot of people have had it, so.
But she just got over it.
Oh,
So it should
okay.
be.
It depends on the strategy. A lot of people have done the Delta and the, what was theirs? Yeah, yeah. It seems that,
I don't want the Delta, thank you. So if I've got Delta from Iceland, so.
we have been ridden by this Omicron.
Yeah,
But luckily, we are all kind of, we're not vaccinated, so.
You know where it came from to Iceland? From my place.
Yeah, that was the original, yeah, you're Austrian, right? Right?
That place is 1 hour away from my.
Yeah, so you live nearby. Yeah, that's where the original code came to Iceland, yeah. And your guys just laughed at our health officials. You should check this out.
Actually, there's a famous interview. There's a famous interview with the health officials from our country. It takes 10 minutes, and I think it says 14 times we have done everything right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, crazy.
It's yeah.
Now we are also just can't believe what our government was doing.
Meh. Eh. Is this the whole group? Is everybody here? Waiting for one? Okay. Okay, hello, group 2, or I don't know if you're group 1 coming in here, whatever you are. I think we'll just start. So Justin, are you muted?
Not anymore.
Nice. Hello and welcome to a different way of thinking about the Arctic. And again, I'm like gonna keep staring at the three of you in the center because we really need your generation of educators to think differently about how you get information about the Arctic. I'd like to introduce our program, which is called Ikarvik. In Inuktitut, it means a bridge, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. We are clearly secret agents of the research world, as you can tell by our fabulous picture. And in the top corner, you'll see Justin Milton, who I've known since he was a tiny kid. And then suddenly he got bigger than me, but that's the way it is. Justin, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Justin Milton. I'm originally from Inuit Youth, but I've been living in Ottawa for the past 7 years. And I'm the Iqaluit manager, and I work with Shelly Elverum, who's in person with you today. I'm virtual in Ottawa, and I also work with another person by the name of Eric Solomon. And basically, we are the staff at the moment at Iqaluit, but we're hoping to hire more in the future. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, so we started as a very small program, and there's been so much demand on our time that we are growing. Sorry to say, you're going to see a lot of me up here today. I'm doing 3 different presentations, so get used to it. Although I guess I have the lowest chance of catching COVID, right? Because I'm like furthest away from anyone. So this is fantastic. I'm just going to just maybe stay here all day.
I'm just teasing.
Wait, hold on. There. I just sent that over to you. Okay, so I would like to invite you to think about Arctic science. So change the slide, please. So my background is an anthropologist. I grew up in the North. I was lucky enough to live in the North for a lot of my childhood. And I've been back in Pond Inlet now for 20 years. So I'm one of those rare people that actually, I don't know, has to face the people that I work with every day. I'm not sure the slide's not changing. Can you? There we go. Okay, so the first most important thing to talk about with Arctic science is the scientists. From my very many observations, I've noticed scientists like to wear red. They like to wear big puffy jackets. Sometimes you find them in groups. Sometimes you see them in
Shelly, I'm going to
standing
have to stop you there.
poses.
I'm going to interrupt you.
What?
These are not Arctic scientists in my head. I know there's they're wearing life jackets and red clothing and winter clothes, which is all important. But this is not how I see Arctic scientists, Shelly. I'm gonna disagree with you.
Oh my God, Justin. Should we change the slide then?
I think you should.
But look, all these shiny white faces. They look like they know the Arctic.
They look like reasonable people, but but this is how I see Arctic scientists. I see an Inuk with his or her phone, using it to navigate throughout the Arctic. This is how I see Arctic scientists. And in fact, I'm going to share with you a statement that I made in 2015 in ArcticNet. And I said, Inuit are the original Arctic scientists. And I still stand by that. And I will always stand by that because Inuit are the original Canadian Arctic people. And so who do you think knows the most about the land, who's lived there for thousands of years? Inuit. And so, yes, I'm not disagreeing that those Kalluna, those non-Inuit in those red, what are they called? Canada Goose jackets. I'm not disagreeing that they're scientists. I'm saying that there's a little gap of information that I want all of us to know, is that Inuit, even though we may not be qualified as such when it comes to like degrees or qualifications in the Western world, we are Arctic scientists just as much as people who have degrees to study in the Arctic.
Okay, wait, so let me get this straight. You're saying Inuit follow the steps of science, like observing and hypothesizing and testing?
Yep, we do.
What?
And a lot of people don't know this, and I don't blame you, because as far as the education system goes, this goes almost untouched. When we talk about Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous values, there is a lot of similarities with Arctic science. We use observation, we use hypotheses, we test, we communicate, we peer review. We do all of those things just in a different way. And yes, Inuit don't have, traditionally Inuit don't have something written, a written language. It's mostly oral, but I still say that it still stands that Inuit use a lot of these rigorous testing methodologies to learn about the Arctic just as much as Western Arctic scientists do.
So wait, your peer review process would mean if you're studying sea ice and you believe that you can walk on it and you fall through, that's a pretty tough peer review system. How do you think that would work in academia if you had to die?
Okay. Yeah.
Peer review.
I mean, that's one way of putting it. And so Indigenous knowledge is different from Western knowledge in that it is very hands-on, it is very practical. And yes, there is that aspect of, you know, if we didn't test this, or someone may have, or a few people in the Arctic may have passed away testing a few experiments, but that's just the reality of the extreme conditions of the North. And so, yeah, we use these really, really ancient, but still very, very relevant data in our heads. And Indigenous people, all Indigenous people for that matter, have the very same thing, where we use observations. We tell it to our communities. We say, for example, this part of the sea ice is unstable. And so the point is, I want to have Indigenous knowledge on the same level and respect as Western science in the North.
Change the slide, please. Okay, so this is something you also don't often see in Arctic science, which is Indigenous scientists. Typically, you know, if you, and I will tell you, Google Arctic scientist, and all you see is pictures of people in red floater suits. Non-Indigenous people standing, usually there's like an icebreaker in the background. This is the unspoken part of Arctic science, which is Indigenous scientist. Now, do you know you were addressed by an Indigenous scientist yesterday? Did you catch that? Inuit Youth is Inuk. She brings to her research a deeper understanding of whales than somebody who's coming from, I don't know, California and sees whales as something neat. She understands whales here, here, and here. So when she is talking about contaminants in the whales, she's understanding it in a completely different way. And when she speaks about whales, now yesterday she did quite an academic presentation, but if you were to meet her in person and sit down with a cup of tea, you will understand it in a completely different way. And that's what we believe is missing in a lot of the conversations in Arctic science, is that there's scientists and there's communities, and they do this. No matter how well-intentioned researchers are, until you get to know the human dimension of the Arctic, you just can't make sense of why a changing Arctic matters. This slide here is a group of Inuit youth in Pond Inlet, Nunavut, out on our sea ice just in front of town, looking for evidence of microplastics. Now, typically in the world of Arctic science, these amazing brains would have been a skidoo driver, a bear monitor, which means you stand there with a gun while someone else does the work. Or sometimes you could be a camp cook and feed the scientists, very excellent use of your brain. It's a system that is so outdated and so ridiculous that it's actually painful to watch at times, to see amazing Inuit scientists who just don't have a piece of paper that says they're an Inuit scientist driving someone around. Here's a master's student who is probably going to die if you don't look after them, but they're the ones that are going to publish and get the accolades for their work. We are challenging the definition of who is an Arctic scientist. And by doing that, we're asking you to consider where you get your information about the North. If all you're ever doing is going to an academic website, you're missing out on an incredibly beautiful and deep, rich knowledge of what is happening in the Arctic. So Justin, when you see this picture, what is it that you think it means for Inuit communities and other Indigenous communities to really be engaged? What does that mean for a world that's trying to understand climate change?
Mm-hmm. So to me, it means, in this case, Inuit, we are trying to invite you guys to work with us because we don't want to force you to use, Inuit Kayamay or Indigenous knowledge. We're just trying to offer you into that. And we're also trying to have a conversation with you guys about how you can work with us, because a lot of the times, in research applications, there would be something along the lines of how do you plan to work with the community, and how do you plan to engage with the community and involve them in a meaningful way? So right then and there, the researcher who's going up gets to define and decide how you work with communities. And so it's really, I think it's really Iqaluit's goal to try and not only help researchers understand the world of the North, but also to help make the overall results better. But we're not trying to say that we're trying to work with researchers so we can get something out of it. Yes, that's one part, but the researcher also gets more qualitative and quantitative and more effective data as a result of working effectively with community members.
Yeah, and there's a really important part to this too that Justin hits on. Iqaluit doesn't only do things on the land. We also are involved in a lot of policy discussions, and a lot of that is framed around funding. Because in order to get funded to go and do Arctic research, you need to have your research question, your methodology, all your steps already pre-decided. That doesn't work. That doesn't work when you come into a community and say, hello, I'm 23 years old and I'm going to tell you about your world because I'm going to be here for 2 weeks. Yeah, and everybody, Inuit are very non-confrontational and won't kind of make fun of you to your face. But after the researchers leave, we're all like, that was funny because there's this person who's studying lichen and they're going to tell you all about, this world that you live in. It'd be a little bit like someone walking into your house and opening up your fridge and deciding that they can tell you all about your life based on the contents of your fridge. Now, I don't know about you, but if someone came and looked at the contents of my fridge, probably be like a little bit of a missed opportunity to understand who I am. So, scientists are trained and the whole system is around getting people to look in very fine detail at one thing. Inuit would like people to have a bigger holistic vision of what Arctic research is. So Justin, you talked about, building that relationship and understanding people as people, but why can't you just tell me your Indigenous knowledge so I can publish it? That would be so much easier for me.
Okay, yeah, that is arguably an easier way, but let me try and visualize it more for you, Shelly, or actually you have the control. So there's going to be a video that Shelly is going to prepare for you guys to watch. And just for a bit of a background, this is actual footage of how Iqaluit works, how we work with communities and researchers. And I think you guys saw the term at the beginning of the presentation. Did you guys see the term SciQ, SCIQ in the beginning at all? Yeah, so that term is something that the youth created in a summit back in 2018. And the video is going to go more in depth into it. But basically, SciQ is bringing the best of both worlds from both Western institutional science and traditional Indigenous knowledge together. And you'll see more of that in the video.
Yeah, if I could get you to change the slide. And while we're doing that, this is Inuit's sister, by the way. So SciQ is, I mean, I love working with youth. I was terrified when I first started, and I'm like, I don't work with youth. I don't know what to do with them. But they have this way of cutting through the noise. And I read a quote recently that if you're not mentored by someone younger than you, you're missing out on incredible opportunities. So I'm fully on board with that. Just wait, it'll come up on the screen. You probably want to take a picture because it's kind of long. But what the youth did was they said, okay, we have scientists and we have communities, Indigenous communities, and they're talking past each other like this, using the Inuit Tukangit, which is misunderstood by researchers as being environmental data. So when people talk about traditional knowledge, scientists immediately go, oh, environmental data. So we can circle where the whales are, or we could see how far the glacier has receded. Inuit are like, whoa, slow down, you're not hearing us. It's the way you work together. The Indigenous knowledge is not just data. There's a huge misunderstanding going on here. It's the way you work together to create the relationship to understand each other. Without that, you are just one of those people in the red Canada Goose parkas doing work in isolation. If you're actually incorporating Indigenous knowledge, it means you are building a relationship that allows you to sit with a cup of tea, laugh, cry, share food, and actually understand what's going on and why it matters. And I think as educators, this part should be very informative to you, because if you want to make people care, you need to follow Indigenous knowledge. So I'll get you to start the video, please. It's on our website.
Hi, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about Iqaluit, so please come in. Inuit Youth isn't probably what you think it is. From what we've seen, a lot of researchers tend to think it's just data, something you can collect and analyze. We know that researchers are always told to incorporate IQ into your research and meaningfully engage communities. But you might not have been told how to do these things. Don't worry, Iqaluit's here to help you.
What's a Karvik?
We're a group of youth from different Nunavut and Yukon communities who are all interested in improving relationships between researchers and northern communities and seeing more meaningful incorporation of IQ into research.
Okay, cool. So you guys can be field assistants and bear monitors for us researchers.
No. Bear monitors and field assistants aren't really what Inuit communities see as meaningful engagement. In fact, many Arctic communities don't feel like they've been meaningfully engaged, consulted, or informed by researchers. We know that meaningful engagement and incorporating Inuit into research has been left up to you guys to figure out on your own. So we're going to help with that.
Okay, so what is Inuit Tukangit?
Inuit Jimanjatugangit.
Kujumajayuganjit.
Inuit Kainamatukwangwi.
Okay.
Finally, someone who is asking what we mean when we say IQ. Inuit Youth is a way of knowing. IQ is more than just traditional knowledge because it incorporates knowledge, customs, and values. It is our way of life. It is as much about how we interact with each other, our behaviors, and our attitudes, as well as what we know.
We chose to use Inuit Youth as a guide to help us interpret what meaningful engagement of Inuit communities and research can look like. We believe that understanding IQ from our perspective is what will lead to better work in our communities.
When you really understand Inuit meaningful engagement of communities just happens naturally.
We created SciQ to help you understand that incorporating IQ is equally about how a researcher works with the community, not just the data they collect. We believe that by following our recommendations, researchers can incorporate IQ in a way that meets the needs of both communities and scientists.
So, how do I do this? In reality, how am I supposed to apply this to my research?
Don't worry, we're here to help you. Inuit Youth have created SciQ, which is our way of explaining how science and Inuit can work together.
SciQ contains 41 recommendations for what you can do before, during, and after your research.
Oh, great. So what's a checklist? And if I do this...
Whoa, slow down. It's not a checklist. It's more about how you should work with the community. Maybe think of it this way. Don't think of it as a checklist of IQ actions, but having great IQ attitudes. This is what will result in better work with our communities.
It's not your fault because you probably didn't know this. When a scientist or researcher says that IQ is not valuable, you're saying that we Inuit are not valuable either. That our customs, our beliefs, and our way of life is not valuable. So because this is just a really big misunderstanding, we wanted to invite you in to work with our communities and provide you some recommendations for what we think it would look like to incorporate IQ into your research. And it might result in better research for you.
So you're telling me that we can create better research?
And it would lead for more meaningful engagement in our communities. All right, now let's look at some examples
Okay, you
of our
can pause it there.
recommendations. Be a human first and a researcher second.
So that's just an example of how we work, because we know that this is a space that's quite tense. There's a lot of shame that's been heaped on Indigenous people, a lot of devaluing their knowledge. In terms of the concept of SciQ, it was created by youth who said, well, this is stupid. We're just going to have to fix that. Now, academic researchers have been struggling with this for a long time. How do you take Indigenous knowledge and science and fit them together? And a young woman that I work with, one of my best friends, had, just with this totally straight face, is like, so stupid. You're trying to jam two things together, which you don't do that. Think of it, and she's a seamstress. She makes amazing clothes for her family. She said, it's like a zipper. They don't need to match up evenly, which is what Western scientists have been trying to do. It's a zipper. You zip these two things together, and ultimately you're getting something better than the sum of the two parts. You're creating a single base of knowledge from which to act. So this is, in my total pet peeve, is people who go, oh, Indigenous knowledge and science, as somehow these are two different things. Yesterday with the conversation about glaciers and farmers here in Iceland, they know this stuff, but because they don't have academic credentials, it's been sometimes sort of passed off as interesting old-timey stories. So Justin, is Inuit knowledge a bunch of cool old-timey stories?
I don't think so. No, it's not. It's not. And a lot of people still think that Indigenous knowledge is this outdated, irrelevant, ancient thing of the past that disappeared long after modern science started rising up. But that's further from the truth. And yes, these are two different ways of knowing, but they're ways of knowing nonetheless. And so, as Shelly said, if we as educators and work together with communities and Indigenous people in a meaningful and an effective way, then yes, there would be that perfect world where all the knowledge that was gathered from this world will be meshed together beautifully into a zipper. But we're not at that point yet. We're still at that stage of, okay, we need to let people know that these exist and also that Indigenous knowledge is valid as well.
Right, and our approach to do it is with humor, because this could be a conversation, and I've seen it happen where people are shamed for not knowing this. And so a non-Indigenous person can feel very uncomfortable. I'm not Indigenous. And I learned really quickly to put all my pride behind me, because if I walk in without humility into somebody else's world, I'm an ass. And unfortunately, this has been the experience with scientists, is people coming, marching in their brightly colored Gore-Tex to save the world and to tell everyone about the Arctic, instead of hearing from two ways of knowing. We value scientific knowledge. We value the tools and the techniques and the way of understanding on a bigger scale than what you can see with the naked eye. But we also know that the richness of the conversation is based on the human experience. So Justin, this is a bit different than our normally we're talking to researchers. This is mostly a group of educators. What do you think the takeaway should be for these educators? And there's 3 like teachers in training. So try to make eye contact with them.
Ooh, I'll do my best. Okay,
right.
So if there's one take-home message that I want you folks to know is this one. There's 2 ways of understanding and knowing in this conversation. There's Western institutional science, and then there's traditional Indigenous knowledge. And these 2 ways of understanding are coexisting with each other. Keyword, coexisting with each other. We want them to actively be a part of one another. And as educators, if we don't proactively take part in bringing these 2 ways of knowing into harmony, then there will inevitably always be gaps in our education system. So as educators, and especially maybe, I don't want to point fingers, but especially to the early career ones, then I challenge you to—
I'm pointing at them.
Yeah, I challenge you to see these 2 ways of knowing, and then try and get a deep understanding of one another, and then make that more informed, authentic decision when coming, or when making your work plan, or when you're trying to learn how to work with the community. I challenge you guys to see these 2 ways of knowing. Thank you.
Great. Any questions or comments? Justin, there's lots of people writing stuff down. It's great. They're very teacherly. I think you're going to need to use the microphone. Otherwise, yep. Justin and not hear you.
So are there programs where you guys could come and zoom into our own classrooms and speak to our own students?
It's complicated because Nunavut has horrible internet connectivity, as everyone who meets with me on PEI knows. On Baffin Island, we can't actually have cabled internet because the icebergs screen. It's an iceberg thing. So most of the time, we also value face-to-face contact. The Zoom thing kind of is weird to see people in boxes and kind of dehumanizes the experience. We do a lot though with early career researchers through APEX and through, which is Arctic Polar Early Career Scientists. We do a lot at conferences on Student Day, because honestly, I love working with the younger generation of early career researchers. They're the ones that are really actively trying to figure out how to bridge the gap and how to create science that is the best possible science. I think one thing that you guys can take away too is that decisions about climate change are done by governments who base it on the best available science. Now, this is huge. If you're a government and all you're ever doing is basing your decisions on the best available science, it means you're only looking at published scientific information, which completely excludes Indigenous knowledge as a way of knowing, unless it gets published. But typically, it gets published through the filter of somebody else. And this is really problematic in my experience, because the act of interpreting, if it's put into somebody else's hands, you know, like I can look at you and go, oh, you're blonde. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about your life as a blonde person through my eyes as a brunette, but I'm sure it'll be fine. So I'm just going to publish this little paper. I'll credit you. You know, it's great. So, you know, being a blonde is fantastic, except for like your eyebrows are a little pale, you know, just as a brunette, I just got to say that. You know, what the conclusions I come to are so off base about your actual life experience. Like, you must be very sad to have light colored eyebrows. Must be like very devastating. Is it hard to leave the house sometimes? And you're like, what are you talking about? Well, this honestly is the experience in the art. I think you're blushing now. Oh, look, blondes can blush too. That's very nice. But it's a very weird experience to have somebody else look at you and decide that they're going to tell the world about you without your involvement. You know, but I got you to sign a release form, so it's fine. It's a very weird thing to have your life reduced and your home reduced to data. And so the human story is what ultimately is going to make people care about this. And, you know, it does trouble me a lot to see educators defaulting to science, to those, you know, those pictures that I showed you at the beginning. And I challenge you, Google Arctic scientist and see what comes up. It is pictures of people in red floater suits. And it completely misses the fact that there are incredible scientists here.
Another question, do you have books for the younger children that they could read, that they could learn about all of this knowledge?
Nope. No, we're a pretty small program that has a lot of demands on us right now. I think also trying to reduce Indigenous knowledge is a really tricky thing. There is a great publishing company in Nunavut called Inhabit Media that has resources both in Inuktitut and in Qallunaktitut, which is English, and has really great things for basically all age groups of young people. So you can check that out.
There's also French if you're a French reader.
Oh, in Inhabit Media, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, another question. That's another blonde person. So I find that blonde people have questions today. See, like I'm studying you.
Well, hi, Justin and Shelly. Thanks for this presentation. I mean, it kind of hits home a lot, and it's been something I've really been struggling with because I've been funded to do an education program in Greenland and bring in teachers from the villages and want very much to engage with them to understand how, I mean, I'm from Florida. I'm teaching how to teach the science of ice and snow, which is weird in Greenland. And so, you know, I need to engage them, want to engage them. Funding comes from places like National Science Foundation in the US and the Danish Embassy. So, you know, you're talking the money to do this is out way far away from the villages. I know that this is a problem. Do you have any suggestions for how to engage? It's a bit overwhelming because I don't have money to go there and talk to them and say, well, you know what, can we do it? And of course, COVID has really made it a problem. But do you have any? It's a huge problem, and it's really one that, you know, my heart is there exactly with what you're saying, and I've been thinking about this a lot. But I don't know what to do, and you know, like asking about if there's something to read, you know, can you call up people, Zoom with people? So how do we get past this? It's a huge, gigantic problem, and in my situation is very similar, I think, to the scientists that are going out to these places. So what do we do?
Well, the difference between you and the scientist, and Justin, I'll let you answer, you know, what can she do before starting this program, but the difference between you and scientists is that you're here to figure out different ways of doing this.
Right.
Often scientists are only rewarded for doing things the way it's always been done. And young academics struggle because their advisors and their supervisors don't work that way. So you are in a better position. So Justin, what would you suggest that she does before going to Greenland? SciQ.
Okay. Yeah, SciQ. So if you're going to Greenland and if you're flexible enough, then I would highly, highly recommend getting in touch with people you're going to get in contact with if you haven't done so already. And also just get to know the places you're going to. And there is going to be a culture shock that's inevitable with everything when you're traveling. But yeah, when you get to know the people in the community, you're also getting to know their way of thinking and their way of understanding. And if you're a researcher who's trying to work with community members, then seeing their way of thinking is really beneficial. And one thing I'll also say too is Iqavik's not trying to say you guys don't know anything, you are stubborn. We're not trying to say that. And as a matter of fact, we don't blame a lot of early career or even regular researchers because they haven't been taught these things when they were training. And so part of it's also a systematic barrier as well. And obviously something like this can't be changed or fixed overnight, but it is a conversation that's still worth having. And sorry, to answer your question, just try and get in touch with as many people as possible, and then try and organize your thoughts about how this community works, if that makes sense.
The SciQ document, which is on our website, actually has those things. I was like, what do you need to do? Okay, well, the first thing is you go in as a human being, and we're not trained in the South to go in and be like, hi, so I have kids and I love to sew. It's such a misfit now when I go into conferences and people are like, yes, now I'm going to start talking. And I'm like, who are you? Why should I care who you are? Coming in with humility, and Eric Solomon, who we work with, and he'll probably say this later, so I won't steal his thunder, so I'm not going to say it because I know he will. But basically, we're not trained to walk in and say, I don't know. If you were to walk in to an initial meeting with people and say, I don't know how this works, but here's some cool stuff I do, how could that be of use? Instead, we're all trained to walk in and go, I have got a PhD and this is what I do. And I know all this stuff. And people go, here's another one. Coming in and as a human saying, I don't know the best, and I'm sorry if I get it wrong, but this is what my passion is. This is my interest. How can I work with you so that we can accomplish this together? So SciQ actually has a lot of those recommendations in it, it's a good primer. It is written by Inuit Youth in Greenland, obviously Inuit as well. We're not saying that it will cover Greenland exactly, but it has some good starting points.
Thanks. Just one last thing. I do want to say that I am working with some scientists that are actually going out to villages and talking to them before coming in with some ideas on how they might use energy better than diesel fuel, for example, and running the villages. And so there is an effort by a lot of scientists to actually get into those villages before doing the science there, or working with, finding out what they want before they bring in their ideas. So there are some that are getting to that.
They're fantastic researchers. One of the key things with the Karvik, though, is we would take those researchers and have them sit with the youth for a day or two before meeting the rest of their communities. Because what we know happens is that a researcher walks into a community and gives like a 32-slide PowerPoint presentation in what they believe is plain language, and people go. So what we do is we have the youth say, all right, what are you here for? Okay, that's cool, but if you describe it that way, nobody's going to understand you, especially when English is a second language. So, okay, cool. What are you doing? Yeah, okay, except you're gonna describe it this way. When are you coming to do your work? Oh, horrible time of year. Nope, that's not gonna work. Everyone's out hunting. Because white people love to come to the Arctic in the summer. And Inuit are like, dude, you know, that's like our holidays. Like, this is like, we get 2 months of summer. We don't want to work with researchers. So, you know, timing, who are you going to talk to? Oh, that's who you were suggested to talk to? Nah, no, you need to talk to these people. So the youth are this fabulous bridge to make sure that the actual, because I see it a lot. Scientists come in and say, I gave a presentation at a community open house, and I go, no one understood what you were talking about. And so there's a lot of that kind of thing that happens where scientists believe they're following the right steps, but without the youth there to go, nah, dude, no. I personally wouldn't feel comfortable going to Japan and telling Japanese people about their world without having a trusted friend beside me to say, yeah, no, don't say that. But scientists, again, are being rewarded for being confident, having all of your planning done before you arrive. And so there's a bit of a misfit with that system. So for you in particular, find some youth and say, this is my intention. How can I best do this? And they will tell you in no uncertain terms if you're doing it the right way.
So here's, how does this work? I just talk. Okay, I'm just talking. So here's a question, maybe not necessarily about scientists in communities in the north, but whole ecotourism industry and guiding, because that's reaching yet another audience. You know, people who I feel I can go out and bring that message back.
Right.
But how, you know, and I do some guiding. So I'm just curious how ECOG works with, if you work with that community of people who come in with their own, definitely the guides come in with their own sense of,
right,
I am an expert on this and I am going to tell the world, and thank you for being our bear guide, and thank you for being our cook, and thank you for hauling our gear. So
here's a postcard from where I'm from. And
let's trade.
Yeah.
Let's trade postcards.
I mean, honestly, my reaction to that is, but wait, there's something wrong with the idea that you need someone else to tell your story. So we do see a lot of ecotourism, a lot of people that come up and say, so I will carry this message out for you now. Well, wait a minute, why? Again, that is that sort of colonialist kind of thinking of, I shall go to Java and I will tell the world, the British Empire, about Java. You know, the time is so past for that. I would much prefer to see someone say, how can I help you to spread the word? But you're going to be spreading the word, not me. I think, again, a guide who comes up for a couple of weeks or months at a time is not the one who sees the full depth of the story.
No, that's what I mean,
Yeah, there's a huge risk.
There's such a depth.
Yeah.
And how, I mean, are you working with any of those groups so that some of those people get it? You know, that they are not.
Honestly, we've got bigger fish to fry because the ecotourism community isn't the one that's feeding knowledge into decision makers. We're a small organization. We have limited capacity. We're really focusing our work on the people who ultimately will have an impact on both a changing Arctic and the people that live there. The guides and outfitters also kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies when people are importing guides and say like, oh, I know ice. It's like, when there's local people. So no offense to you. I understand that's part of your.
Well, I was just curious because it is a slippery slope for one.
Yeah.
But some of those tourists who come on those trips go home and then have lunch with important people. And so sometimes I look at that as a conduit.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I know you're a small organization, but it's just interesting.
No, it absolutely is. But especially in the high Arctic, it's such a small blip of time that really we're focusing not on having other people tell the story of Inuit. Even for me, I mean, Justin wasn't able to come. I wouldn't want to be standing up here. This isn't my story to tell. I can help tell the story, but the time is long past for other people to be telling the story on behalf of Indigenous people.
And that's a great message to share with those.
Now, however, if you're a guide and you say, you know, I'm just wondering, can you zoom in? Because I'm having dinner with some people, like, could they meet you and hear from you? That's a different thing.
Yeah, and that's a great thing to communicate to some of those companies.
Yeah. It's funny because I was talking to an Inuk man about this, and he said, how would people feel if a male researcher, and I can say this because there's only like one dude in the room. How would you guys feel if Trevor went out and spoke to the media about the experience of female polar educators? How? You can tell married men because they're like, I would not do that. But again, and I like to be a little bit provocative here, but would that be okay? Even if he was really good and said great things, isn't there going to be a part of you that goes, that was a really weird choice? That was a really weird choice. There are highly qualified people here to tell this story. Why did they pick him? So just, I like to use these kind of examples because I'm not Indigenous. I don't claim to know the full depth of things. My goal is to establish a comfortable place where people can talk and to learn. And I'd like to be provocative. I like to say, how would you feel if Trevor told your story? You're going to immediately, no matter that he passed an ethics review or, you know, is paying people in the community, it's still not going to feel right. And chances are he's not going to capture the depth of your experience here. Although I am going to write about blonde people, and I'm going to tell you all about your experiences here.
Are you finished?
I am. I think we lost Justin.
I'm still here.
So we'll bring it. Oh, Justin's here.
Oh, what? Where are you?
I was here the whole time. Maybe I wasn't in your screen.
No.
He was the second dude.
Oh, he was the second dude in the room.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess we're wrapping up ish. But please feel free to visit the akarvik.org website. There's some resources on there that, yes, it is directed towards researchers, but I think just from the human experience, it's a pretty darn good and amazing thing that the youth have done. So congratulations to the youth for killing it. All right, I'll send you the link for the next one because you're going to see him again too.
Okay. All right. See you guys later.
Yeah, bye, Justin. All right, so hopefully that has shifted a bit of your thinking about the Arctic and what's possible.
I would like to thank Shelly and Akarvik for the impact they have had on my thought process. And it's been huge.
Oh, thank you.
So,
thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed getting to spend a bit of time with her and Justin and her work, their work.
And one of the things that I think is critically important. So for instance, when you're asking about going to work with a different community, first time I met Trevor, it was kind of like weirded out. I'm like, wait, he wants to do what? You mean all those things that we talk about? And to watch Trevor with his academic credentials come in and sit and have tea and laugh with people. My youngest daughter just adores Trevor. Like if you've been on a Zoom call with me, Naya always shows up. She'll be in our video later, but Trevor comes over and my daughter is like literally like on him. And there he is, holding her and talking about methyl mercury. It's the humanity that Trevor brings that has allowed Smart Ice to flourish. So the connection there, I think, is between Smart Ice and Akarvik is a really strong example of what shifts when you come in as a human being. And so for educators to be able to take that back and tell the human story of the Arctic is going to make people care about microplastics, receding glaciers, ocean acidification.
And that was one of the feedback that I consistently received is don't forget to laugh and, you know, have a bit of fun.
A whole lot of fun.
It's an important part of just that one of those values is fostering good spirits and teaching with an open heart and being with an open heart. Yeah.
Awesome.
Like our dance today.
Yep.
You know, what a difference that made to the energy in the room, you know, everyone getting up and holding hands.
So a smart
Yeah.
icy Carvic dance will be on the
Yeah,
next.
yeah. We'll work on that.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so today we have lunch for 45 minutes, and then we have hands-on sharing. We have some people that brought some stuff, and where are they going to be setting up?
Upstairs in the room, the first room on the left,
First room on the left? Okay,
that we've been using for breakouts.
all right. And does anyone want to talk about what they're going to share real quick so we get a preview or? No? Who's sharing?
There's not a schedule or anything.
There's not a schedule.
Miriam, Leah, and Agatha. I'm doing tabletop turbidity testing.
Nice. And you two are going to share something. Well, yours is actually.
I'm going to talk about the clothing, right?
About the what?
The clothing.
Clothing, I think that's actual session. Yes.
But Ilona was going to teach us something right now before lunch. Oh, yeah.
Okay. And then Agatha's sharing upstairs and.
It's penguin dynamics on the Western Arctic Peninsula.
Nice.
Is it possible to show a little bit of my language so that?
You have to step on, is it on your computer?
Yeah.
You know, we might just load it up and do it after lunch. It might be easiest unless,
Maybe later I'll show you what.
that would be great. That would be
You know,
great.
that we are as indigenous peoples living in the nature, we are, can I start? We imitate, our cosmology is that we live with the nature and we are a part of the nature. So earlier it was like the anthropologists, they would say that the indigenous peoples, they are primitive, and it's not true that I mean, it doesn't exist those good spirits, bad spirits, but of course we had to hide very, very good, and we kept it until now, all our beliefs, and just because we lived with the nature, we have you know, survived, we were adopted, and we also, as a people, as human beings, we were stronger, and we talk with the animals, we talk with the trees, we feed them, we just, you know, a part of this. And I'm going to teach you some of the sounds that we imitate when we hunt, when we give offerings, when we talk to and I was going to show you the dance, the seagulls dance of the Koryak people of Kamchatka. So what you're going to do is try to pronounce this. Is the like a sound which is in many of the indigenous languages. So it imitates the sound of reindeer and then also other animals. So can you say that? So you have to do it like this. Until you're really up. Can you do that? Can we try that? Can you feel it? Try. Try again. Let's do it again. From the low. So it's you know, you can so you learn something else. Yeah, and then after I was going to show you also the moves of the seal and oars. You know, you can do it afterwards. But try to practice with the seal. Go out to the.
So many birds attack you.
It's quite easy.
Thank you. All right, enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.